Hey, what's up everyone, Raging Golden Eagle here, having way too much fun as always. Please forgive me if this is a little bit late and possibly shorter than usual, but let's just say the universe was conspiring against me making this video, but I'm not going to bore you with these details here. Check out my Twitter account if you're actually curious. But I do have to announce that I'm going to be switching the order around this time. I'm going to do the proper list first, and then the returning shows and the honorable mentions. Should have been doing it that way from the start. But either way, without further ado, here are my favorite anime of the spring 2018 season. As usual, ordered by the day of the week the show aired, so don't try to read too much into the ordering here. Quick links in the description box below so you could just jump to the stuff you care about, along with links to where you can officially watch everything I mention. First on the list we have Magical Girl Ore. Crunchyroll themselves have been trying to push this one pretty hard, but unlike some of the other stuff they've been trying to push, this one's actually legitimately good. This is a show about your typical aspiring wannabe idol finally getting her wish and becoming a magical girl. Except her magical quote-unquote girl form is a dude. So yeah, in case you couldn't figure out by what I just told you, this isn't really a magical girl show as much as it is just a straight-up comedy that uses magical girls as the plot device. Though as part of the comedy, they often end up ripping on magical girl tropes and the anime industry as a whole, actually. So to give you a few examples of the type of humor you'd expect to see in this show, there was the moment Saki first transformed into her dude form. She of course was pretty pissed at her mandatory mascot creature, which in this anime is basically a Yakuza member, and he just tried to calm her down and told her that, well, it makes sense, right? This is what you transform into when you're fighting, and a dude's body is a lot more suited for fighting, right? Yeah, not very current year of them to say that, is it? But they legit brought that up. So then she pretty much accepts that and goes, yeah, well, what about this frilly cutesy outfit? And he just responds, well, you're a magical girl, supposed to be cute, right? Yeah, she wasn't too happy with the contradiction. I also like the running gag they do that makes fun of the old anime trope where the girl runs out of the house with a piece of toast in her mouth because she didn't have time to eat breakfast. Except in this case, she's not running with a piece of toast in her mouth. She's running with one of those portable trays held up on a neck harness that has a full-blown hot pot on it, and is just normally eating it as if it was nothing while running at full speed. If any of what I just said sounds even remotely amusing to you, then I highly suggest you check this show out because there's plenty more where that came from. And next on the list we got Golden Kamuy. And this one, I gotta say, has to be the closest I've seen in a while to your traditional action-adventure storyline. The main characters are literally hunting for hidden gold, for God's sakes. When was the last time that plot device was whipped out? And the two main characters are an interesting bunch. The story itself is based around the World War I era, so one of the main characters is a soldier returning from the front lines fighting against Russia, and the other one is an Ainu girl. Now what's an Ainu, you may be asking? They are pretty much to your regular Japanese people what Native Americans are to Americans now. And they're also the group of people I often like to use against people who claim Japan is a homogenous culture. It only seems that way from the outside because they physically look similar, but culturally they couldn't be any more different. So while this unlikely pair goes about hunting for gold each for their own reasons, and in the process of doing so having to track down a bunch of escaped violent criminals who have the maps tattooed in code on their bodies, in such a way that requires them to be skinned for it to be assembled, yeah, we get into some pretty cheerful territory here, huh? This anime definitely does not skimp out on the gruesomeness, let me tell you that. But while all that's going on, our two main characters are actually learning about each other's cultures in the process. So in the off chance anyone listening to this happens to be an SJW, take notes. There are ways you can educate people on other cultures and the like, and make it entertaining at the same time. Not everything has to be preachy, ham-fisted, in your face. And Golden Kamuy is the perfect example of how to do it correctly. This right here is a very entertaining, traditional-style action-adventure storyline, although it does get a little bit more gruesome than the ones you're probably used to, with a bunch of cultural education just thrown in there, and it fits together perfectly. So if you want yourself a good old classic action-adventure and/or are interested in the Ainu culture, you cannot go wrong with this one. And now we get to my personal favorite of the season, the big one. The remake of Legends of the Galactic Heroes, Die Neue These. And I gotta say, holy shit, I was not expecting good things from this one. But that's probably just because I'm biased when it comes to remakes, because I'm used to American remakes, which always suck. Every time Hollywood remakes something, it just gets crappier and crappier, it seems. With a few exceptions, of course. Hashtag not all, because I know some of you out there are angrily typing at me right now. But it gets even better because this is not just a remake, but it's the remake of my favorite anime of all time. So obviously I was gonna check it out, but let's just say going into this, my expectations were through the roof. And the biggest shock I got was I was not let down at all. I love this new version. I'm loving it every bit as much as I did the original. Hell, even the art style, which is completely different now, it's obviously been modernized because the original is 30 years old now, if not older? My apologies, I don't know what year it came out. I know the original took many, many years to finish coming out. But yeah, I actually don't mind the new art style. Even though it's obviously aimed at the Fujoshi crowd, quite a few of the characters in the original were designed in a similar fashion to begin with. Most of the new character designs I'm perfectly okay with or even like more than the originals. Some of them, though, not so much. The design for Shinkup, for instance, his older one was a lot better of a fit for the character in my opinion. But that's just nitpicky. To get to the point, what is this show about? Well, this right here is the shining paragon of space operas. This entire pretty damn long epic story for the most part covers the war going on between a big-ass empire and the Free Planets Alliance. And you see, this is one of the things that really makes shows like this stand out. Legend of the Galactic Heroes is such an awesome show because neither of the two sides is good or bad, really. Each side has its own heroes and villains. And I know what some of you may be thinking. Oh, obviously the Empire, the dictatorship, they're gonna be the bad guys. And the Free Planets Alliance, they're the democracy. They're gonna be the good guys, that's just a given. Well, what if I told you that the Empire was the shining example of a benevolent dictatorship, at least it becomes one as time goes on, and the Alliance is the perfect example of a corrupt oligarchy? All of a sudden, it's not so black or white anymore, huh? Like I said, each side has its own heroes and villains. And there's a lot of them too, because this show follows dozens of characters on both sides. So in that sense, it may be a little bit too much to process if all you want is some mindless action. But if you want yourself an epic sci-fi space opera, you cannot go wrong here. I still say Legend of the Galactic Heroes is the best example of the genre that's currently in existence. And if you disagree, then please actually prove me wrong. Worst case, if I'm wrong, I get to see something even better. No way for me to lose. But definitely check Legend of the Galactic Heroes out. If you have to only watch one show this season, make it that one. And damn, we're on a roll in this time period because we're actually getting into another of my surprises of this season. That being Last Period. No, this isn't an anime about school or menstruation. What we have here is an adaptation of a mobile game that definitely fits into the adventure comedy mold. And if I'd heard something like this maybe 5 years ago, I would have pretty much been rolling my eyes. But after the past few years, we've had so many legitimately good adaptations of mobile games that hell, that seems to me to be a badge of honor right there. When I'm looking through a list of shows airing in the season trying to decide what to watch and I see something that's based on a mobile game, that automatically puts it up on my list. Because these mobile game companies are pretty good about just throwing money at anime companies and just saying, do what you want with it, just make something good. And something good we have, because Last Period is hilarious. I'll admit, it's not always on the top of its game. Some of the meme humor they try usually falls pretty flat. But then you got all the pot shots they're constantly taking at mobile games and how they basically are meant to take your damn money and drive you into bankruptcy. And even when the humor is not being meta, it's actually still pretty good. Like this most recent episode that came out, one of the characters, let's just say, has a secret identity, and she ended up getting scheduled for a trip with both of the groups she's in at the same time in the same place. If you're anything like me, you've seen that storyline play out before. But this probably has to be the best I've seen it. Oh yeah, and I really like the art style in this one too. They're able to do this cutesy look pretty well without it being way too over the top. I would highly recommend this show to anybody who wants your classic fantasy adventure comedy. And if you happen to be a recovering whale who was burnt by the mobile game industry, even better, because you're going to be getting a lot of these jokes. And now we have the usual consequence of doing this chronologically instead of by the type of show, and the tone shifts drastically as we next get to Steins Gate Zero, which is surprisingly a direct sequel to the original Steins Gate. Well, kind of. Steins Gate Zero is the continuation of a alternate timeline, I guess, where Kurisu actually ended up dying, and Okabe has some serious PTSD over the entire situation. Both Kurisu's death and all the time travel and all the repeated deaths he had to witness over the years. And just when he thinks he could finally get some peace, well, let's just say it wouldn't be much of a show if the shit didn't hit the fan again. And I haven't played through the game, so I don't know where exactly they plan on taking this story, but so far, like 6 episodes in, there hasn't been any intentional time travel going on. So they could really just go two ways at this point. They could either go back to the time travel shenanigans, which honestly, when it comes to Steins Gate, that's probably the best I've ever seen it done. Or this time, it could be completely different. Okabe could only have one chance to get it right, which would be a pretty hard pill to swallow once you've had pretty much infinite resets all this time. But whichever direction they go, the show has done a pretty damn good job so far of slowly building tension. You know something bad's about to go down. They've been foreshadowing it pretty much since the first episode. And the tension's just slowly building up, kind of like in the original series, until it pretty much explodes in everyone's face, about twice as fast as the last time around though. So given all of this, if you're a fan of the original Steins Gate, I highly suggest you check this one out. So far, it's been a worthy sequel. If you're not familiar with the original Steins Gate though, you're pretty much just gonna have a lot of questions after every episode, so I suggest you watch the original first. It's really good, you should have seen it anyway. Then go back and watch Steins Gate Zero. The Steins Gate franchise as a whole is a prime example of a very good drama psychological thriller, with a little bit of sci-fi thrown in there for good measure. Is all this psychological drama stuff a little bit too heavy for you guys? In that case, perfect, because now we're tone shifting into cute girls doing cute things. There has to be at least one of these every season, and of course, I'm gonna watch it. This time around, it's Comic Girls. The story of 4, well, I guess 5 now, aspiring and currently professional manga artists living together in a dorm, who, as I kind of mentioned, all happen to be cute girls. And as is usually the case with all these shows, each of them has their own separate issues they need to work through. Well, one of them pretty much has all the issues, and all the rest of them just kind of have a subset of issues. And the general storyline is all about them working together to overcome their problems, really. And while the story itself is pretty competent, as is usually the case, that's not the main draw here, is it? No, you're here to see the cuteness. And well, if you've actually been watching instead of playing video games or just listening to this in the background, you have been seeing plenty of the cuteness. If you like what you see and you want to see more, do be sure to check this show out. There's plenty more where that came from, and if you're a fan of the genre, I really don't need to say any more. You know exactly what you're in for. And if all this cutesiness is just a little bit too much for you, how about we jump straight into one of the most awesome shows I've seen in a while? At least when it comes to sheer coolness factor. That being the obviously pretty Western-inspired Megalo Box. This show is based in a future where they have a sport called Megalo Box, which is pretty much just boxing, but with the assistance of some upper body power armor to make your punches a lot harder. And trust me, I know your concerns. As someone who's boxed before himself, there's no way something like this could exist in real life where they augment someone's punching power without also augmenting their opponent's facial defense. Enough people already get severely injured and even die in boxing as it is. But don't let reality hold you back. We're going for coolness factor here after all. And other than this slight sci-fi premise, this pretty much just is your typical from rags to riches boxing story that you've seen plenty of times before, although very well done. And the writers of this show are pretty damn good at covering real-life topics too. For instance, the arc that focused on the disabled veteran boxer. From the way it got into his motivations and his backstory, his attempted suicide even, you could tell whoever wrote that storyline either went through something similar or was very close to someone who did. That one arc on its own has to be one of the best moving on storylines I've seen in a long time. But in between all these serious tearjerkers, you actually got some pretty awesome and well-animated boxing matches. And by well-animated, how many times do you see a non-CG anime these days go and rotate a camera around a fight? 'Cause that happens in this anime. Any animators out there will know too, this takes a lot of effort to do and make look good. But these guys pulled it off. They knew exactly where to spend their animation budget for the biggest impact. So look forward to seeing dudes get punched in the face from pretty much every angle you can imagine. So if you're a fan of boxing, if you're a fan of boxing anime in particular, of which there's actually quite a bit, or you just enjoy your story of the underdog rising from the bottom and triumphing in the end, well, maybe. We haven't gotten to the end yet. But if they take that away from us now, I'd be disappointed. But either way, if you like this sort of thing, definitely check this anime out. And hell, of all the shows airing this season, this is probably the closest one to Western animation that's out there too, or at least closest to being acceptable for Western audiences. This is like the TV anime version of a Miyazaki movie as far as I'm concerned. This is the type of anime that could reach a so-called wider audience here in the West. So be sure to spread it around to all your friends too. And with that out of the way, back to the comedy. Now we're going to be talking about Hinamatsuri. And this show is just weird all around. And you know what? I'm just going to come out and say this now. Just like with certain video games, God of War, it seems that certain anime are also trying to quote-unquote grow up and get more mature. So instead of going for the go-to magical girlfriend storyline that's been overdone for the past few decades already, Hinamatsuri opts to go for the magical daughter route. Oh, and it just gets weirder from there. One of the main characters is a rising star in the Yakuza. The other is a little girl who has telekinetic powers that apparently get sent to this world from her own universe, and happens to end up in his apartment. And while originally she used her powers to pretty much subdue the guy, and he just went along with her demands because he was scared of her, they eventually ended up getting along and forming a bit of a father-daughter dynamic. And well, that's where some of the comedy comes in. Mixed with some surprisingly deep storylines too. For example, one of Hina's friends, Anzu, actually comes over too, originally to try to take her out, but she gets soundly defeated, and when she tries to go back home, her little device doesn't work anymore, and being too proud to go back and ask her rival for help, she ends up in a homeless camp. So they actually do a few chunks of multiple episodes going into how hard it is to be homeless and how valuable money really is, especially to those who take it for granted. But again, this is a comedy first and foremost. So tying in with the homeless angle, there was one arc where Hina actually broke one of Nita's vases, so he just got mad and kicked her out of the house. And where did she end up? Well, she ended up staying with Anzu at the homeless camp for a few days, and afterwards Anzu and Nita actually meet up. And this was after he'd already been chastised by everyone he knows for kicking Hina out. Even though he didn't mean for it to be permanent, he was just wanted to give her a lesson, but you know how it goes. So he thought Anzu was gonna chew him out too. No, she just says, I understand why you did it. I had to kick her out after 3 days too. She has no respect for money, of other people's property, none of that. So they made a nice little bonding moment over that whole storyline. I just thought that was pretty funny. And that's mostly because I've been in a similar situation before, like nothing as serious as that. But it's happened before where I thought someone was gonna chew me out for something I did, and they just say, oh, I know the other person. I'm surprised you didn't go further. It's a beautiful moment. But definitely check this one out if you want a good laugh. And if you want a different kind of laugh, especially if you find someone trying way too hard to be a horror to be funny, you're definitely gonna have to check out Magical Girl Site. Now, in all seriousness, even I will admit the first episode was definitely trying too hard, but honestly, that's why I watched it. I find that stuff funny. They were trying so hard to, well, be horrible to the main character that it just came off as over-the-top and comical. At least to a heartless bastard like me. But you want to know what good came out of this? Well, it seemed to trigger the hell out of all the SJWs. They can handle murder and torture and all that, but bullying, oh, that's crossing a line. I personally don't even understand how you can be horrified by something like this because, like I said, it's over the top. Way too over the top. But once it gets over that initial hump, the show actually gets pretty good. If you can imagine it, it's like an even darker version of Madoka Magica pretty much. All the girls are casting their magic with their own life force as the fuel. There's this big disaster looming in the near future that they gotta find a way to work around. Those who gave them their powers are actively against them and just using them. Oh, and one of the requirements for becoming a magical girl in this universe is you have to go through quite a bit of tragedy. So there's a lot of tragedy porn in this anime. A lot of it. Some of it's so over the top it's actually comical. But others, damn, it actually hits quite close to home. And I actually really like how the main character's been growing over the past few episodes. At first, it was pretty hard to root for her because she was just a, pretty annoying character. The type of character that exists to feel sorry for, not to root for. But hey, just like with Gantz, initial first impressions aside, characters are actually capable of changing and growing. It's amazing what they're capable of when they're not perfect from the outset, huh, Marvel? Ooh, too much of a low blow? Okay, I'm sorry, I won't do that again. No promises though. But overall, like I said before, despite first impressions, this show has actually been progressively getting a whole lot better as it goes on. It's actually pretty competent as a dark magical girl show now. So if that's the type of thing you just can't get enough of, you do not want to skip this one. I am warning you though, you're gonna have to soldier through that first episode. The whole episode is pretty much everyone's just trying to one-up how they can torment the main character. But then she gets her powers and things actually start getting good. And as a bonus, like I said, this show has triggered the fuck out of the SJWs. And if they're triggered by it, you know it's got something going for it, so definitely check it out. And with that, we not only get to the final surprise show of this season, but the final show in general for this list, since I usually try to limit it to 10 after all. This one is, drumroll please, Musume Pretty Derby. No, I'm not joking, it's actually that show. The anime, based on a mobile game, are you noticing a pattern here yet? About horse racing. Except it's not about horse racing, it's about horse girl racing. Cause everything has to be anthropomorphized into a cute girl after all. But hey, I'm not complaining. I'm definitely the target audience for that sort of stuff. But I'm not gonna lie, even myself, when I read the description of this show, I just went, wow, this sounds stupid. I'm gonna have to check it out. And then I ended up actually legitimately enjoying it. You got a little bit of your monster girl vibe thrown in there, obviously because we're dealing with horse girls. You got a little chunk of sports anime thrown in there as well, because again, they're racing. And speaking of that, unlike a certain other racing anime that's airing right now, I actually appreciate that they can do the whole race within a few minutes. And they don't drag out the last 500 meters of the race over like 4 episodes. Some of you out there may know which anime I'm talking about. But nah, Musume doesn't play that shit. They don't drag anything out. The races are just like real horse races, they're over pretty quick. As are the hopes and dreams of some of the contestants. Cause while the anime itself focuses on Special Week, the main character, and what her goals are, like any good sports anime, none of the other characters are really enemies. They're all just rivals. They're friends with each other off the track. You don't want to see any of them suffer a crushing defeat, but you know it's unavoidable. On the plus side though, while everyone definitely has their downs, they also have their ups. Racing isn't usually a fight to the death. You can always come back and win again, and this anime actually makes a pretty good point of showcasing that in a few cases. So if you like your sports anime with monster girls and cute girls thrown in, add a little bit of slice of life in there for good measure, as well as a pretty damn good sense of humor. I mean, dang, these guys actually know how to do a recurring joke without it getting old, unlike Family Guy. Then definitely check out Musume. And that, my friends, is the end of my list of favorite anime shows of this season. So that means now I get to get into the honorable mentions, which in all the previous videos were actually before the main list. Again, I still don't know why I did it that way. But either way, first off, we got Fist of the Blue Sky Regenesis. Any of you who've watched this anime know why it's not on the main list. It would have been on the main list if not for the CG. And for those of you who've been listening to me for a while, you know I actually like me some CG anime. I'm usually defending CG and saying it is the future. The only problem is a lot of shows can't seem to do it right. Probably my favorite anime of the year of 2017 is Land of the Lustrous, which is a CG anime. But that's CG done right. Fist of the North Star Regenesis, though, not so much. I don't even mind what it looks like, but the fact that they reduced it to such a low frame rate, it looks like you're trying to run a modern video game on a PC from the 90s. Though I do admit in recent episodes they've gotten a little bit better about that. But CG aside, this is pretty much a Fist of the North Star story through and through. Except in this case, it's focusing on one of Kenshiro's ancestors from like a century in the past, who also happens to be called Kenshiro actually, funny enough. But it's not the same guy. But all the usual Fist of the North Star staples are there. Tragic love stories, revenge, friendships with former rivals, of course big burly dudes killing each other. If you're a fan of Fist of the North Star, give it a shot. Though if CG is a major turnoff for you, maybe don't. because I don't think you'll be able to get over that in this one. And next honorable mention, Dorei-ku, the animation. And the best way to describe this anime is, well, a very high-stakes gambling anime. Why the high stakes? Well, the entire plot device in this anime is this thing called the SCM, or Slave Control Method. It's this retainer-looking thing you put in your mouth, and if you challenge someone else that's wearing one of those to any sort of duel, it could be a fist fight, a game of rock, paper, scissors, any of that, the loser becomes the winner's slave and is pretty much unable to disobey orders, with very few exceptions. And this anime doesn't only focus on the matches and the outcomes. It goes into pretty much each character's motivations for getting into this in the first place. Because let's face it, what normal person with a stable life would voluntarily walk into something like this? Though I will say, the ultimate lesson at the end of it all is pretty much the same all around. No matter how bad you think you have it that this is worth getting yourself into, plot twist, it's never worth it. Getting yourself into a high-stakes game like this will always make whatever your situation is worse. Not just for you, but for everyone around you, as this anime is always sure to strike that point home. It's not just your life you're screwing up the lives of everyone around you as well. So yeah, overall, not a very cheerful anime here. But if you like some high-stakes gambling anime with some very harsh moral lessons, can't go wrong with this one. Next honorable mention, we got Sword Art Online Alternative, Gun Gale Online. And I know what you guys are thinking, but no. This one doesn't qualify as either a returning show or a sequel. This is basically a spin-off. The Gun Gale Online portion of Sword Art Online was very popular, and for good reason. It was good. And here they're capitalizing that by doing a spin-off with a completely new cast of characters, new storyline, new everything. Just based in the same universe. But the feeling of awesomeness is definitely still there, though without the risks that came with getting shot by a certain gun from the main anime. At least so far, nobody that's been killed in-game has been killed in real life. This is Sword Art Online though, so it's probably only a matter of time until that happens. But so far anyway, the story's actually been pretty good, at least for a VR MMO first-person shooter tournament, which is what the first half of this season has been. But now that the tournament's over, we'll see where they go from there. So far, I've been liking it though. And final honorable mention is Cutie Honey Universe. If you're a fan of Cutie Honey, it goes without reason you're going to need to watch this. If you're new to the series, this is pretty much a reboot, so you don't need to be familiar with the original. In fact, hell, I'd say this is a good place to jump on. Now, the main gist of this storyline is Honey is pretty much an android who has a whole bunch of different transformations for different purposes, like combat, being an idol, going undercover as a reporter. That's pretty much her main power. And this power also often leads her to be in various states of undress, getting fondled. Yeah, good times all around. You would think anyway. It seems like it will be a pretty lighthearted comedy almost, right? And it is about half the time. And the other half, it's an honest-to-God brutal tragedy. And that's one of the things that I actually find appealing about this show, but I realize will be a pretty big turnoff for some people. And that's how this show seems to insert comedy into the worst tragedies. For example, Honey's friends are being bombed and getting killed and dismembered left and right. And in the middle of all that, they have to be throwing in some comic relief. And you got two extremely goofy-looking characters doing and saying some goofy things among a sea of corpses. This sort of thing is pretty damn jarring for people who aren't familiar with this type of writing. But if that's something that doesn't bother you, then definitely give Cutie Honey Universe a shot. If nothing else, do it for the visuals if you know what I mean. And now finally, we got the returning shows. Shows that are pretty awesome, and I know some of you have been asking, why isn't this show on the list? Well, it's probably because it's returning from a previous season and I already covered it. Either way, first off, we got Basilisk, the Ouka Ninja Scrolls. I mentioned the last time I talked about it that it didn't get into killing off any of the main characters yet, but it looks like, finally, a whole season length of time later, that is now changing. It definitely broke away from its predecessor because it took a lot of time off without any major main characters getting killed off, but I bet that's probably because they were saving it all for the final battle. So far, I've still been enjoying it though. After that, we got Toji no Miko. This one I'm surprised is still around, to be honest with you. I thought at the end of last season they were actually building up for a big climactic battle with the last boss. And at the end of the final episode of last season, I thought it felt kinda rushed. I was like, what the hell kind of ending is that? That was bullshit. But that's just because it wasn't even an ending. It had a second season. The storyline continues right where it left off the first time around, and that was a pretty pleasant surprise. Cause I've really been loving this show the longer it goes on. I'm glad to see more of it, but unfortunately I looked ahead and apparently this is the final season. It's gonna be over now. But I'm definitely gonna be enjoying it while it lasts. This one keeps getting better as it goes on. If you want to watch some cute girls sword fighting, check this out. Also about to come to a close, we have Beatless. And you know this one's actually close to finishing because they are starting to drop main characters too, just like Basilisk. But that aside, this show has actually gotten even better since the last season at pushing the various questions it has as to what may become of a society when they start personifying AI. And also returning, and as epic as ever, is My Hero Academia. And I gotta ask, are these poor kids ever gonna be able to have a training camp without being attacked by villains? I mean, come on, if they have a third training camp after this, I think the biggest plot twist they could write is that it goes off without a hitch. But then again, if they do that, they're not even going to show it on screen. It's just going to be like an in-between episode afterthought. But either way, My Hero Academia shit's really starting to hit the fan. It's as strong as it's ever been. If you like some good superhero stories, give it a shot. Next up, Amanchu Advance. A direct continuation over the previous season of Amanchu that came out like, what, a year ago? 2 years maybe now? And this is pretty much more of what you got the first season. Cute girls going diving with a little bit of hint of Yuri thrown in there. If that sounds right up your alley, then definitely give it a shot. I, for one, especially like it because I'm quite sure that Pikari has to be my spirit animal. She's always having way too much fun. Next, we get to Darling in the FRANXX. And oh man, this show has been nothing but ups and downs. It's been a roller coaster all the way through. It's still alternating between life or death action and slice of life a few episodes at a time. But the overall conflict between the humans and the Klaxosaurs seems to be finally coming to a close. All the big guns are being brought out and the final battle is about to commence. But how will our cast of main characters fare? If they come out of this alive, is there even going to be a place in the new world for them? Well, we're just going to have to find out. If you liked what you were seeing so far, no need to stop now. And next we get to a show that I was really glad to see return because Hozuki has to be one of my favorite anime characters of all time. So yeah, obviously I'm talking about Hozuki's Coolheadedness, or Hozuki no Reitetsu. This here is an anime focusing on the life and work of Hozuki, who is King Enma's chief of staff in Hell. So as you can imagine, there's plenty of dark humor in this one, and I love me some dark humor. So if you love you some dark humor, I suggest catching up from the very beginning with this show. And finally, Food Wars Shokugeki no Soma is also making a return this season. It's just as awesome as it's ever been, but the stakes are even higher than they've ever been. Holy shit, so many main characters are just being expelled left and right now. But I wouldn't be too concerned about that, to be honest with you. This is Shokugeki no Soma after all. Getting expelled in this anime is like getting killed in Dragon Ball Z. It's just a temporary inconvenience at best. Cause you know you are just one Shokugeki away from being reinstated anyway. But you know how that saying goes, right? It's always darkest before dawn? This show's definitely been doing a pretty good job of constantly knocking our main characters back down into the darkness, even after every time they have like this little shred of light they grasp onto. But this time around though, the end's in sight. If they're not gonna triumph this season, then it's gonna be the next one, but it's getting pretty close. And whew, that was it. I don't know how long this video is going to be by the time I edit it down, but I've been recording for an hour and a half now. I'm willing to bet it's going to be like 20 to 30 minutes by the time I edit it down. But that aside, I am so glad I was finally able to finish this because, as I mentioned earlier, the universe was conspiring against me to put an end to it. Illness, power outages, flooding, everything you could think of it was thrown at me. But now we're done. My list for this season's done. And I hope you guys enjoyed it and got something out of it. It will make all this effort worthwhile on my end, that's for sure. And that's all I gotta say, guys. Thanks for listening.